Even when I said my vows, I had never been one for pretenses. I believed in faith, not the kind that demands a show, but rather a quiet belief grounded in discipline. Nevertheless, the church had a way of drawing people in. I witnessed this in the shrill cries of penitence, in the confessional, and in the peculiar behaviors I encountered while making my rounds. I learned to brace myself for the strange, but what I didn't anticipate was how many of those moments would linger with me, clinging like oil to the soul, impossible to wash away. It all began subtly, as most things do. I was assigned to a remote parish in a town so small it barely qualified as a town. The people here lived in silence, their faith expressed in whispers, shared in dim kitchens or on sun-beaten porches. My arrival was met with polite apathy. Hushed conversations would come to a halt as I entered, and glances would dart toward me before quickly averting. They wanted me there, needed me there. Yet there was an unspoken fear that hung in the air, something they never directly addressed. The first time I heard mention of the rules was during an otherwise ordinary confessional. A woman, her voice trembling, whispered through the grate, "Father, it comes every few years. We keep the doors locked. We leave no light." Before I could inquire about what it was, she hurriedly recited a list of her sins, minor grievances about a neighbor, and lapses in patience with her children. I pressed her for more information, but she shook her head, her words tumbling over one another as she fled the table. I didn't pursue her. I thought she was mistaken. It wasn't until later that I began to piece things together. One night, as I prepared for bed, a loud pounding erupted at the rectory door. A young boy, no older than 10, stood in the doorway, his eyes wide and glassy, his breaths shallow. "Father," he rasped, "it's here." Before I could question him, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward the edge of the woods. His father, a wiry man with a deep-set scowl, met us there, gripping a shotgun. He didn't speak. He merely nodded and gestured for us to follow. Deep in the forest, we stumbled upon the carcass of a deer, or at least, that's what it had once been. Its body was eviscerated, ribs broken outward as if something had exploded from within. The flesh was coated in a thick black slime, and the stench was unlike anything I'd ever encountered, metallic and rancid, as if the meat were rotting at an accelerated pace. "Tracks," the man mumbled, pointing to the ground. They were enormous, clawed, and oddly misshapen, resembling a biped that had never quite mastered walking upright. Before I could fully comprehend what I was witnessing, a low growl reverberated through the trees. The boy screamed, and his father raised the pistol, but the sound was abruptly cut short by something moving, too swiftly to follow, through the branches above us. I caught only fleeting glimpses, a leathery, elongated body, too many arms, a face that was less a face and more a collection of writhing parts. "Go back to the church," the father barked. I didn't argue. We ran, but whatever it was didn't pursue us. I never saw the man or his son again. The following day, their house stood empty, their belongings abandoned. I never inquired about them in town. I didn't want to hear the answers. The next year, a new confessional box was delivered. The old one, with its warped wood and frayed curtain, had served longer than anyone could remember. I should have discarded it, but out of some misguided sentimentality, I kept it in the storage room. Almost immediately, I began to regret that decision. One evening, after locking up the church, I heard a faint rustling coming from the storage room. I attributed it to mice and resolved to address it in the morning. However, the sound persisted, growing louder, like fabric tearing, accompanied by a low whispering that I couldn't quite decipher. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. The old chapel stood there, but its curtain was moving as if caught in a breeze. I knew it was impossible. The room was sealed, and there was no draft. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, and pulled the curtain aside. There was nothing inside, no rats, no source for the noise, just the empty table. I let the curtain fall and turned to leave, but the whispers began again, louder and clearer. "Father," it said, a woman's voice. I whipped around to find the curtain open, revealing a figure seated inside. It was a woman, her face pale and blurred, as if viewed through frosted glass. Her lips moved, but the words came too quickly, overlapping and unintelligible. I instinctively reached out, and as my fingers brushed the wood, the image vanished. The next morning, I burned the booth. The rumors persisted for 3 days. It was during my 5th year that I met him, or it. I'm still not sure. The man appeared unremarkable at first glance, middle-aged, nicely dressed, with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He attended Mass regularly, always sitting in the back pew and leaving before communion. I didn't think much of him until one evening when he lingered after the service. "Father," he said, his voice low and contemplative, "may I speak with you privately?" We moved to my office, where he sat across from me, hands folded neatly in his lap. His gaze was unsettling, not because of its intensity, but due to its emptiness. "I've seen you in dreams," he stated. "You've seen me too, haven't you?" I started to respond, but he interrupted me. "No, don't answer. I already know." As he spoke, I noticed his eyes. They were black, not dark brown or hazel, but pure, liquid darkness, reflecting nothing. He smiled again, wider this time, revealing too many teeth. "I've been here a long time," he continued. "Longer than you. Longer than this town. I just wanted to thank you, Father, for keeping the door open." "What door?" I asked, and his grin widened at my question. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something grotesque flicker across his face, a second set of features, rigid and unnatural. "You'll see," he said, standing abruptly. He walked to the door, paused, and turned back to me. Soon. He never attended Mass again. A week later, the rectory basement flooded for no apparent reason. The water was ice cold and pitch black. The church had a loft, though I rarely ventured there. It was a cramped, dusty space filled with forgotten items and boxes of records no one cared to sort. One night, as I prepared a lecture, I heard singing coming from above. It was faint and off-key, reminiscent of a band warming up. I climbed the narrow stairs, flashlight in hand. The sound grew louder, resolving into a song I didn't recognize. The words were foreign, guttural, yet strangely melodic. At the top of the stairs, I stopped. The attic was dark, but I could make out the forms of figures, dozens of them, standing in neat rows, their faces turned toward me. Their features were indistinct, as if carved from wax and left too close to the fire. They danced as they sang, their movements jerky and unnatural. "Stop," I ordered, my voice breaking. The singing ceased instantly. One by one, the figures turned and walked toward the far wall. As they moved, they disappeared into the darkness. When the last one was gone, the attic light flickered on. I never returned there again. Years later, I saw him again, the black-eyed man. He stood at the edge of the graveyard while I conducted a burial. When the ceremony concluded, he approached, his smile as disturbing as I remembered. "It's open now," he said. "You've done well." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I thought the black-eyed man would haunt my dreams for years, but his parting words faded into the chaos of parish life. The church had a way of demanding your attention, pulling you back to the tangible. The soup kitchens, the leaking roofs, the decreasing collection plates. I wanted to convince myself that he had been nothing more than a figment of my imagination, a product of long nights and overwhelming stress. Yet, a lingering feeling remained, an unsettling sensation I couldn't shake. That feeling took on a more tangible form one winter afternoon when a little girl entered the confessional. It was a dreary day, the kind that sapped warmth from your bones. I had decided to open the church early, lighting candles to fend off the gloom. The usual trickle of parishioners came and went, but she arrived alone, her tiny silhouette framed against the massive oak doors. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, dressed in a pale blue dress that seemed oddly thin for the cold weather. She walked down the aisle slowly, her footsteps almost soundless, before stepping into the confessional. Unsure if she had entered by accident, I followed her. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," she began, repeating the opening lines with a precision that felt rehearsed, her tone sweet yet hesitant. "What sins would you like to confess, my child?" I asked. There was a long silence before her voice returned, but it was no longer hers. "You can't save the sinners, Father," she said, her words guttural and rasping, like stones grinding together. "They belong to me now." Before I could respond, she spoke again, this time sounding like a child once more, her voice taking on a sing-song cadence, a poem or perhaps a chant. Her voice resonated through the confessional. "They come with their guilt, their words, their lies, but their souls are mine when the body dies. Their prayers fall flat, their tears turn cold, for faith won't save what I already hold. You stand at the altar, you preach and you pray, but every sinner you bless will wither away. My chains are made, their links are tight, and I'll drag them all screaming into the night." My hands gripped the wooden sides of the seat as if trying to anchor myself to reality. "Who are you?" I finally managed to choke out. The girl laughed, a sharp, piercing sound that felt alien coming from a child. It echoed, seeming to emanate from all around me. "You already know, Father," she said. And then, just like that, she vanished. I stumbled out of the confessional, my legs shaking. The girl was nowhere to be seen, and the church was empty. The only evidence of her presence was a faint scent of sulfur lingering in the air. A few weeks later, I was asked to perform a blessing at a nearby home. The family had recently moved in, and strange occurrences had begun almost immediately. Doors opening and shutting on their own, a cold draft that never seemed to dissipate, and most disturbingly, the sound of a woman crying late at night. When I arrived, the house felt wrong. The family, a young couple with an infant, looked exhausted and sleep-deprived. "She comes every night," the wife explained, cradling the baby against her chest. "Always at the same time, midnight. We hear her crying, but when we go to check, there's no one there." I performed the usual rites, sprinkling holy water in every corner of the house and reciting the prayers of exorcism. Just as I finished, the sobbing began. It started faintly,
barely audible, but grew louder with each passing second. It wasn't just crying, it was howling, raw and guttural, the sound of someone in unimaginable pain. It came from upstairs. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound. The master bedroom was empty, but the crying was now deafening. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw her. She stood in the corner of the room, facing the wall. Her body was clad in a wedding gown, yellowed with age, its hem torn and stained. Her veil obscured her face, but I could see strands of hair sticking out at odd angles, damp and clinging to the fabric. "Leave," I ordered, holding up the crucifix. My voice was steady, yet my hands trembled. She turned slowly, her movements unnatural, as if she were being pulled by invisible strings. Her veil lifted slightly, revealing a face that was anything but human. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound emerged. Instead, the walls of the room began to shake violently. Furniture toppled over, and the air filled with the stench of rot and decay. I recited every prayer I knew, my voice growing louder as she advanced toward me. Finally, she stopped, her form flickering like a dying flame before vanishing entirely. The house fell silent after that, but the family moved out a week later, and I didn't blame them. The church bell hadn't rung in years. It was cracked, its gears rusted beyond repair. Yet one night, long after I had retired to bed, it began to toll. I sat up immediately, the sound jarring in the stillness. It wasn't the melodic chime I remembered from years ago. It was a harsh, uneven ringing, as if someone were striking it with brute force. Grabbing my coat, I rushed to the bell tower. The climb was grueling, the ancient stairs groaning under my weight. When I reached the top, the bell swung wildly, despite the absence of wind and any sign of a person who could have set it in motion. Then I saw it, a figure hunched in the corner. Its head was bowed, and its twisted skeletal hands clutched a length of frayed rope. The figure raised its head slowly, tilting it as if studying me, before standing to its full height. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my balance on the narrow platform. With a guttural, unnatural sound, it reached for me. But before it could touch me, the bell let out one final, ear-splitting toll. The figure dissolved into smoke, leaving behind only the frayed rope, which fell to the floor in a heap. As the years passed, the occurrences grew stranger and more frequent. Each one felt like a test, a trial meant to wear me down. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened last summer. It was late in the evening, and I was locking up the church when I noticed a man standing by the altar. He was looking away from me, his stance rigid. "I'm sorry, we're closed," I called, but he didn't move. I approached carefully. As I drew closer, I realized he wasn't standing. He was floating, his feet a few inches off the ground. His head snapped around to face me. It was the black-eyed man. "You should have listened," he said, his voice a blend of many, as though a chorus of voices spoke through him. "Listened to what?" I demanded. "To the girl, to the bride, to all of them," he replied, stepping toward me. "You think you can save them, but you can't. They belong to me." I raised the crucifix, but he laughed, a hollow, bone-chilling sound that made the walls tremble. "It's too late, Father. The door is open." With that, he vanished, leaving me alone in the silent church. But they always come back. I've never been one to seek out conflict. My role, as I've always understood it, was to guide and protect through faith, not through force. However, after the black-eyed man's warning, After hearing those words again, "The door is open," I knew I couldn't remain silent any longer. Whatever was happening wasn't merely supernatural play or a test of faith. Something far greater was approaching, and it wouldn't stop until it consumed everything. That very night, I began preparing. The rituals of exorcism had always been a last resort for me, but I could no longer avoid them. I dug out the old books, the ones I had studied in seminary, but hoped I would never need. I called the bishop for permission, and although they were hesitant, more concerned with scandal than salvation, they eventually approved. What the black-eyed man had said about the door troubled me. I didn't know what door he meant or how it had been opened, but I was determined to close it. I pored over every bit of lore I could find, searching for anything that might give me an advantage. Weeks passed, each night filled with restless study and uneasy silence. The church felt darker now, its walls pressing in on me. Then, just as I feared, the final encounter came to me. It was a stormy evening, and lightning cut jagged scars across the sky, filling the air with a charged, heavy expectation. I found myself alone in the house, when suddenly the front doors of the church slammed open, their echo reverberating through the halls. A low, rumbling laugh followed, sending a chill up my spine. Grabbing my cross and exorcism kit, I stepped into the nave, where I saw the black-eyed man standing in the middle of the aisle. His form flickered, as if he were caught between this world and another. His grin was wider than ever, his teeth glinting like shards of glass. "I told you, Father," he said, spreading his arms. "The door is open." I stood my ground, clutching the cross tightly. "I don't care what door you've opened, you're not staying." His laughter echoed, reverberating inside my mind. "Oh, I'm not going." But he is. The air around him shimmered, warping like heat waves, before splitting open to reveal a gaping rift, a doorway. From it poured a foul wind, bringing with it the stench of decay and a chorus of agonized screams. Something was coming through. It emerged slowly, savoring its appearance. First came the claws, then the head, grotesque and malformed, with a wide, lipless mouth revealing jagged rows of teeth. Its eyes were empty sockets, glowing dimly with a sickly green light. Its body followed, a hulking mass of muscle and bone. The demon let out a deep roar that shook the very roots of the church. The black-eyed man stepped aside, bowing mockingly. "All yours, Father," he said, before vanishing into thin air. The monster turned its eyeless gaze toward me and spoke in a voice like grinding metal, its words dripping with evil. "Priest, you cannot stop what has begun." I took a step forward, raising the cross. "This is the house of God. You will not damage it." It roared again, overwhelming me, and lunged. I barely had time to move, diving behind one of the pews as its claws tore through the air where I had just stood. The wood splintered under its strike, sending bits flying. I began the rite of exorcism, my voice shaky but determined. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I tell you, depart from this place." The demon laughed, a hideous, choking sound. "Your words are weak, priest. Your faith is weak." It lashed out again, this time swiping at the altar, and the sacred room erupted into flames, consuming the cloth and candles in seconds. Fear rose in my chest, but I pushed it down. I couldn't let fear take hold. I continued the rite, moving carefully to maintain distance from the creature. It was fast, unnaturally so, but clumsy in its movements, as if its form were too large for this world. I used that to my advantage, ducking behind pillars and weaving through the pews as it followed me. At one point, it cornered me, its massive form blocking my exit. It raised a clawed hand to strike, but I thrust the crucifix forward, pressing it against its skin. The response was immediate. Smoke rose where the cross made contact, and the demon let out a pained, deep howl. It recoiled, giving me enough time to scramble away. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, I shouted, my voice growing stronger with each word. I command you, leave this place. The demon's form began to flicker, its edges dissolving like ash caught in a breeze. But it wasn't done yet. With a final, desperate roar, it charged, its claws spread. I had anticipated this. In my studies, I had learned of a binding ritual, a way to trap a demon within a consecrated place until it could be banished entirely. It was risky, requiring the demon to freely enter the circle. But I had no other choice. I led it toward the altar, where I had drawn the circle earlier that evening, hiding beneath the rug. As it closed in, I stepped into the middle, raising the crucifix high. Come then, I teased, my voice steady. Come and face the light. The demon paused, its eyeless sockets narrowing as though sensing the trap. But its rage overcame its caution, and it lunged at me. The moment its claws crossed the boundary of the circle, the symbols flared to life, glowing with a strong golden light. The monster let out an ear-splitting scream, thrashing wildly as the circle's power held it in place. I began the final spell, my voice rising above the demon's howls. By the power of Christ, I bind you. By his blood, I condemn you. Return to the pit from which you came. The light intensified, enveloping the demon completely. Its form writhed, shrinking and collapsing in on itself as it was pulled back through the rift. With one final deafening roar, it vanished, and the rift closed with a thunderous crack. The silence that followed was overwhelming. The fires at the altar extinguished themselves, leaving only charred wood and the faint smell of smoke. The church lay in ruins, pews overturned, figures shattered, but the battle was over, the monster was gone. I fell to my knees, clutching the crucifix tightly. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to pray, not out of despair, but out of gratitude. In the weeks that followed, I repaired the church piece by piece, with help from the congregation. Many had heard the commotion that night, but hadn't dared to enter. When they saw the damage, they asked questions, but I offered only vague answers. The truth would have been too much to bear. The black-eyed man never returned, and the rift did not reopen. Whatever door had been unlocked was now tightly sealed, bound by faith and fire. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. I knew it might not last, that evil has a way of finding cracks in even the strongest walls. But for now, the church stood as a refuge, a beacon of light in the darkness.